Good afternoon. I am Andrea Chisholm with the Midday News. A special welcome if you're watching on onespotmedia.com. Chief Justice Brian Sykes has weighed in on criticisms over the ruling involving a student with dreadlocks from Kensington Primary in St. Catherine. The Chief Justice also had a response to discussions about the case involving 5 detainees under the state of public emergency. O'Shane Masters reports.
Chief Justice Brian Sykes is concerned that statements on 2 recent highly publicized court matters may undermine public trust in the system of justice in Jamaica. There has been heightened public interest in the habeas corpus applications of 5 men detained under the states of emergency and the Kensington Primary School here issue. In a release on Tuesday, Justice Sykes said the events of the past 2 weeks serve as a reminder that comments should not be made before all the relevant facts are obtained. He noted that the public should not form any conclusion based extensively on information gleaned from the media regarding judicial decisions. His comment comes as citizens have been criticizing the judges in both the Kensington Primary students' case and the SOE detainees. Justice Sykes says the court's decision was based purely on the law, evidence, and submissions presented to the court. He says while criticism of the court's decision is welcomed, persons should not suggest that judges were biased in their conclusions. In the meantime, Justice Sykes says the abuse of judges by way of social media and other platforms is to be condemned. He says members of the public should appreciate that the system of litigation is one in which there are 2 or more parties and they may not all be of the same view. In those circumstances, judges will have to decide which party is successful. The Chief Justice also noted the judiciary's concern and disappointment that some members of the legal profession are still discussing cases in the press before a written judgment. He knows that any discussion in the public sphere by attorneys at law, especially those involved in the cases, should be measured accurate and reliable information. He noted that the exchange that takes place between counsel and judges is not an authoritative pronouncement of the final position of the judge on the matter before the court. As for members of the media, Justice Sykes is calling on news organizations to be guided by the Code of Ethics for Journalists and to fact-check information. O'Shane Masters, TVJ News.
And former public defender in Jamaica, McCook, has described the ruling re Kensington Primary as unfortunate and suggested that an appeal is needed due to unanswered questions. The Kensington Primary judgment has been widely discussed since its publication this week. Speaking yesterday on Radio Jamaica's Beyond the Headlines, Mr. McCook said the judgment was limited in scope as there was not enough focus on cases which deal with the Charter of Rights.
Sad piece of illiberal judicial vandalism. When one reads the decision, it really takes us back to a period when we didn't have the amendment to the Constitution, which is now the Charter of Rights. So let's deal with the issue of, for example, the right to education that the judge said was never engaged. We have to remember first and foremost that the only reason why the young lady, the child, was still attending the school was because there was an injunction compelling them to do so. Not because the policy had been suddenly evaporated, but because there was an injunction in place.
In other news, political commentator Shalmon Scott has outlined 3 factors which he says are working against an early election. Mr. Scott says corruption allegations, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the deterioration of the economy are issues that must be dealt with by the government.
And so all of those factors, the convergence of them, would suggest an election that should be called later than earlier. But then that is from my perspective. But there is a date to watch also. And it is the 30th of October of this year. Why it is of significance is that it in the history of the Jamaica Labour Party, the largest victory that the party has had. and also any government in power has had since we have had universal adult suffrage is the October 30th, 1980 general election.
A Jamaica Labour Party councillor escaped death Monday night after he was allegedly attacked by a group of gunmen. Councillor for the Red Hills Division Keith McCook says he believes the attack was politically motivated. Shamela Pullen reports.
A tense calm now overshadows the Kitson Town community in Red Hills, St. Catherine. This after gunmen launched an attack on Jamaica Labour Party GLP councillor for the Red Hills Division, Keith McCook. Councillor McCook says minutes after 9 Monday night, he was sitting on his veranda at his house when the attack happened. He said a man rode up on a bike and signaled to him. He then went to hear what the man had to say, given that the man looked like someone he knew.
So me just put on my slippers and I come down. I don't know, by the time I reach at the last staircase, it's like me that delay a little. And by the time I should have step around my van, so I hear a gunshot. It's like they just only wait for me to come around the van. Because the car and the van just park one behind each other. And the whole of the car back shoot up.
Councillor McCook says the police were immediately called to the scene. But Councillor McCook says he thinks the attack on his life is politically motivated.
They are trying to indicate to put a man as a councillor. So they are going around night stop at night over the last 3 weeks. And say they have to do anything in their power to get me out. And it has reached to a point where we had a meeting up here with the area council 2 chairman and had a executive body of the party, and it wasn't in their favor. And that is where they start to take it on the road every night over the last 3 weeks.
TVJ News could not independently verify the claim. As for Councillor McCook, he says he will not be forced out of politics.
I born here, I live here, and I'm not living here. So I need them to get this thing straight. This is my life.
When TVJ News contacted Dr. Christopher Tufton, the Member of Parliament for West Central St. Catherine, the constituency in which the division falls, he condemned the incident while calling for the perpetrators to be quickly apprehended. Shamela Pullen, TVJ News.
And it's time for a break here on the Midday News, but stay with us. We have many more stories when we return. Welcome back, and we're continuing the news. Member of Parliament for St. Thomas Easton, Dr. Fenton Ferguson, is calling on the Health Ministry to intensify public education in the parish. St. Thomas has recorded 17 cases of COVID-19 and 1 death. Dr. Ferguson says St. Thomas could suffer greater damage if the Health Ministry does not intervene.
What I am seeing in terms of the average citizen walking around without mask, without social distancing, it is telling me that left on its own, we could have very, very serious outcomes. And in so doing, the ministry must ramp up its public education program.
Dr. Ferguson is also calling for the Ministry of Health to increase capacity at the Princess Margaret Hospital to deal with confirmed cases.
I'm also concerned about the hospital facilities because, again, I believe even with the present numbers, the hospital would not be in a position to undertake patients coming in, and therefore that would require transfer to Kingston and elsewhere.
Some medical practitioners are calling on the government to reimpose strict protocols for COVID-19 amidst an increase in the number of confirmed cases. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Jacqueline Bisesa-McKenzie says the increase is a cause for concern. As at August 4, Jamaica recorded 920 confirmed cases of the coronavirus.
So we await the policymakers' decision. We put forward, a review of what is happening. We make our suggestions. We do understand that several things have to be taken into consideration, but we continue to lobby, both from the policy level as well as within the country, the population itself, in terms of persons adhering to restrictions, and for the reinstating of restrictions where it is that we cannot depend on persons to do so.
However, Dr. Bisesa-McKenzie says it's also up to Jamaicans whether strict restrictions are reimposed.
If it is that Jamaicans cannot accept the personal responsibility to protect themselves, their families, and the country on a whole, then they have to prepare themselves for enforced restrictions. It is very unfortunate. We've come a long way. We have gradually been lifting the restrictions with continued public education and sensitization, hoping to keep the level of awareness up.
National Security Minister Dr. Horace Chang says he is not in favor of a recommendation for the employment contracts of members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force to be renewed based on their performance. Dr. Chang told TVJ News that's not a consideration of the government at this time.
Performance in this context, in terms of what are your criteria? You're going to look at how many people get arrested. That's not the answer. Or how many gunmen get killed. Those days are gone. You can evaluate the professional response of the police quite effectively, and they will get promotion based on that. But to tie this out, I don't think it's necessary at this point in time.
He says a reward system is best suited for the different skill sets in the force.
Public order itself is to do it successfully is a skill. To go out there on the road and ensure that the traffic, beside the legislation to support it, but traffic run right, keep public order where there's a crowd and in marketplaces. It's a tough job, right? So I'm more concerned now with how we look at the police and reward them for the skill.
The performance contract recommendations are or is included in the National Consensus on Crime signed by the government, opposition and stakeholder groups on Monday. Residents of McCook in Clarendon received a new water supply system yesterday. Prime Minister Andrew Holness says the National Water Commission (NWC) will begin expanding their services to rural areas.
Our target is to have 85% of the Jamaican population within 100 meters of a water supply. That's what we want to do. But what we are really trying to do is to bring the water into your homes. The other 15% that is not within that service, we will use special projects, small projects, whether it is entombments, springs, catchments, to supply them.
The Prime Minister reminded residents to conserve and urged them not to be complacent with their bills.
Always pay something on your water bill. Don't let it run up and it get out of hand and then the NWC have to come and cut it off. Even though we have been very lenient during this period of COVID.
The community received 2 water tanks and pumps. Mr. Holness says more rural communities will benefit from the expansion project. And time now for a preview of what's coming up in this evening's health report.
In the next edition of the Health Report, We'll look at children and adjusting to COVID-19.
Children have also been able to wear masks. However, we must be very cautious where that is concerned because children, it's not advocated for children under 2 to be wearing masks. And then there are some children, especially when we look at our special needs children, who will not be able to tolerate a mask. And simply having the mask there now becomes more of a risk because the hand keeps going to the face, and that becomes more of an issue. So we have to maintain those same precautions that we would for an adult.
That's the health report this evening in Primetime News. And now for today's healthy living tip. Keep your hands clean. Practice social distancing. Clean and disinfect your home and wear a face mask.
And in sports, West Indies opening batsman Kieron Pollard has blamed the current state of cricket in the region on a lack of succession planning. Speaking on the Mason and Guest show in Barbados on Tuesday night, Pollard said administrators did not plan beyond the team's glory days that saw them win 2 world titles in the 70s.
I don't think that we planned as well after the West Indies were such a dominant force for all those years. We didn't develop the necessary infrastructure. We started to take things for granted, thinking that we'll continue to produce world-class players where other countries were putting systems in place. We were just developing on natural talent, And I think we've lost a lot of players along the way, especially from the age group levels of cricket to senior cricket. Because of lack of infrastructure and lack of opportunities.
Now, West Indies fast bowling legend Sir Andy Roberts, who was also a guest on the show, quickly hit back, saying current regional players lack the desire to succeed at the international level.
A lot of people who play cricket in the West Indies, I don't think they commit themselves enough. Because if you do, you wouldn't be averaging 30 in first-class cricket. And that is what we are getting. Our batsmen are averaging 25 to 35. And you can't beat any team in the world with that sort of averages. So our guys first have to go and stand up in front of the mirror and look and say, what am I doing to improve myself?
And that's it for the Midday News. I'm Andrea Chisholm. Join us at 7 for the Primetime News package. On behalf of the news, sports and production teams, good afternoon.